Things look bad for Annette Poitras. She is lost in the Canadian wilderness with 3 dogs for company. The weather is atrocious, and she's starving and dehydrated. The dogs are up to something, and when she looks closely, they seem to be doing something more helpful. So we hope you're prepared for what's to come, folks. It's a remarkable tale with everything from drama to sweat-inducing suspense. For Annette, though, there's no way she could have predicted what eventually happened during that scary spell in the woods. She wasn't exactly a stranger to the terrain. A British Columbia, Canada resident, Annette was part of a loving family back home. She had a spouse in the shape of Marcel Poitras and a daughter. Plus, the mom was well regarded in her community thanks to her love of dog walking. She even made a career out of it. So, Annette was familiar with the nearby hiking trails, seeing that she often traversed them with local pups. The paths around Coquitlam's Eagle Mountain were no different. But as winter closed in toward the end of 2017, the dog walker's knowledge of that area went out the window. On November 20th, 2017, Annette headed out to Eagle Mountain with 3 dogs. The first of those was Chloe, her pet collie. As for the other 2, Bubba the Puggle and Roxy the Boxer belonged to different owners, who had handed them over to the canine walker. Anyway, all appeared to be well as the quartet traversed the paths, with Annette keeping a close eye on the animals. At that stage, it looked like a pretty standard stroll for the dog walker. Yet everything changed when a group member suddenly broke away from the beaten track. Hey, it can happen, right? As any dog owner will tell you, they don't always stick to the paths. So Annette gave chase to the boisterous canine, hoping to get the walk back on track. Unfortunately, though, her plans quickly fell, figuratively and literally, by the wayside at that point. Annette lost her balance during the pursuit and suffered a nasty fall. The impact of the landing left the mom with an injured back and a sore side. But that's not all. On top of that, her phone also went missing after she hit the ground. Talk about bad luck. Thankfully, Annette could still move around despite her injuries, but one thing became quite clear: this walk was over. She needed to leave the woodland and get these scrapes checked out pronto. On that note, the British Columbia resident rounded up the 3 dogs for the return trip. Here's where it all started to unravel, though. The weather took a turn for the worse after her tumble, coupled with Annette's injuries. Rain pelted the path relentlessly, making it much more hazardous than usual. Due to that, the dog walker couldn't go back the way she came. So Annette was essentially stuck. She could not take a chance walking the now treacherous trails, given her less than stellar condition. With that in mind, the mother stayed in the area where she suffered her fall. The 3 pups also sat with her as the evening drew in. Meanwhile, away from the wilderness, concern about Annette and the dog's well-being began to ramp up. With her phone gone, Marcel nor anybody else could get in touch with her. We can only imagine how they felt at that stage, especially as it got darker. Marcel eventually contacted the authorities later that day when there was still no sign of Annette. From there, a plan was put together by Coquitlam Search and Rescue and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. With the tools at their disposal, they hoped to locate the missing dog walker as soon as possible. But it wouldn't be easy. After all, where could you start? Well, the authorities were given a helping hand by Mark Hare. Before Annette left the trail to pursue the runaway dog, he noticed her from his car. He was taking a smoke break at the time. Speaking to the CTV News website in November 2017, Hare recalled when he was made aware of the search for Annette. He said,
"When I saw this all over the news, I'm thinking, my goodness, this is that lady. I saw her. I gotta call this in."
Thanks to Hare, the search parties now had a specific section of the woodland to comb through. Make no mistake though, locating Annette would still have its challenges, given how vast and dangerous the terrain was. She didn't stay in the same spot on her second day. After sleeping under the stars that first evening, Annette noticed she was like a dog again. Like people were searching for her, she now needed to follow suit to find the missing canine. So the walker had to summon a lot of energy and grit to pick herself up off the ground. Annette went, hobbling across the tricky terrain with her 2 other furry pals. Could she locate the dog? Luckily, the group headed in the right direction as they approached some power lines. The pup soon reappeared, much to her relief. Her stress levels must have been off the charts. Mind you, whatever positivity Annette was feeling during that spell quickly evaporated. Why? Simple. After making her group whole once more, she couldn't continue mapping out a potential escape route. Time had defeated them, meaning another evening out in the Canadian wilderness was on the cards. The home was still a long way away. The authorities struggled to pinpoint Annette's location despite sending out a pair of helicopters, several all-terrain vehicles, drones, and a search party of over 100 people. The weather was also an additional problem, bringing things to a standstill for a while, and the mood outside of the woods couldn't have been much better. We wouldn't have blamed Marcel for feeling downhearted at that point. After all, his missing wife wasn't just battling the elements. She had no food or drink to keep her strength up either. Along with her injuries, that was a nasty mix, so time was very much of the essence. Yet, as the authorities and search parties continued to press ahead against the awful conditions, Annette did receive some unexpected help when night drew in. Who from? The dogs, of course. Yes, she realized that her canine pals were doing something she could replicate while squatting down to rest. Marcel went into more detail during an interview with Global News in November 2017. He informed the Canadian station, Annette happened to notice one of the dogs was digging a hole to sleep in. The undergrowth is very spongy, it soaks up water. So Annette started sweeping away all the brush and everything to get down into the dirt and kind of made herself a little well to sleep in, Marcel continued. She learned from the dogs. Wow, talk about teamwork. The animals stepped up here, even if they weren't fully aware. Hey, that's not as bold a claim as it sounds. It might have even saved Annette's life. Think about it. Staying dry across the night, she gave herself a better chance of avoiding issues such as hypothermia. And on top of that, Marcel also noted that it hadn't been as cold in the freshly dug holes. Let's switch our focus to the third day of the search now. Even though Annette and the dogs were still hanging in there, they couldn't spend much more time in the woods. Something had to give, and soon. On that note, the breakthrough was finally made at around 11 a.m. on November 22, 2017. Annette overheard the commotion as a sound sweep was conducted with whistles and cries along the trail. The relief must have been palpable. Her nightmare was ending. To shed some light on what happened next, Michael Coyle spoke to CTV News. He was the boss of Coquitlam's search and rescue. Very chatty and very happy. At the end of one of those segments, a search party heard Annette replying, and they heard the dogs barking joyfully. She was very chatty and happy to see the searchers, but very wet and stressed out from being out in the cold that long. From there, Annette and the dogs had to wait a bit longer before they could be lifted out of the woods. The mom was up first, as she got attached to a harness hanging from a helicopter. Once a medical team unloaded her, her furry pals then took the same trip. It was quite a sight for the surrounding onlookers, but that's got us wondering, what kind of state was Annette in after the dramatic rescue? Marcel offered insight about that while chatting to CTV News, providing a vivid description of his wife before she got to the nearby hospital. Marcel said, Annette was white as a ghost. The medics couldn't find any veins to give her any intravenous in the van. They needed to get her warmed up a little bit more, but she's doing great. As for her injuries, Annette luckily didn't break any bones from the earlier fall. It's fair to say things could have been much worse for the dog walker. Al Hurley certainly thought so, as Coquitlam Search and Rescue's search manager spoke to CBC in November 2017. He said, "It's a miracle that she seems in pretty good shape." Hurley also explained how the helicopters managed to miss Annette before she was rescued. Hurley continued, "It was extremely wet and slippery in the woods, with very thick underbrush. The infrared sensor was out with the helicopter yesterday and didn't pick up any body heat, so that's how thick the brush is." What about Annette, though? Did she spot the aerial support from the ground? So near, yet so far. According to Marcel, the answer to that is an emphatic yes. Annette noticed one of the helicopters on her first night in the wilderness. Yet, as Hurley just noted, the tree coverage was so thick that she couldn't catch their attention. That must have felt like a gut punch, right? Still, Annette wasn't too disheartened by that early setback. But the loss of her cell phone made things difficult as the hours rolled on. Marcel told Global News, "She knew the search parties were out there. She had no phone on her. He had no way of telling the time. She doesn't have a watch. She just uses her phone. Yesterday, just before Annette was found, she didn't know what time it was," Marcel said, and her thoughts were, "I'm spending another night out here." She had been positive at that point, but that was starting to crush her. You can hardly blame her for that. We'd be much the same. For Annette and the 3 dogs, it didn't happen. Sticking with the canines, they escaped unscathed as their relieved families embraced them. Imagine losing a pet in that manner. We can't forget about the torment. Anyway, off the back of the rescue, Marcel was desperate to hail the work of the search parties as well. Annette's husband said, "They would drop anything to give me an update, show me what was going on. The communications were great. The people in the field, it's obvious you love what you do. These people are doing this on their own time," Marcel added. "They're leaving their job, what they get paid to do to pay their mortgage, to come out and help people who need their help, support them. They deserve it, and thank you." The mayor of Coquitlam praised those guys in a heartfelt social media message. This could happen to anyone, so we're left with just one question now. What happened to Annette once she recovered? Well, the dog walker had a book written about her ordeal in 2018, titled 3 Dog Nights: The Search and Rescue of Annette Poitras. Speaking after its release, she told Canadian newspaper Tri-City News, "This could happen to anyone. Many people can learn from my experience and be better prepared in the backcountry." Tell us your opinion in the comments section so we can all read it. Thanks for subscribing to our channel, and remember to turn on the notification bell so you will always be aware whenever we upload new episodes. Best regards, and see you next time.